S 5090 by the House is a strike-all amendment to Senate Amendment H 8220, previously passed by the Senate. The House amendment includes provisions on AEA reform, minimum teacher salaries, and FY 2025 SSA state percentage of growth. I move the Senate concur with Amendment S. What is it? S 5090.
Senators, this is your final opportunity to speak on S 5090 to H 8220 to House File 2612. It is the final opportunity to speak on the amendment and the bill. Once we concur with the House, we move to final passage of House File 2612. Do any senators seek the floor to speak on the amendment S 5090? Is there discussion on the amendment? The chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator Donahue.
Thank you, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but in this case, getting worse every time. This amendment has 4 actual different divisions. The AEAs become a free fee-for-service model, giving 90% of funding to the AEAs year 2 and 10% to the schools year 2. So they are actually removing 10% of special education funding possibly from the AEAs providing those services, because that will go directly into a general fund where they can spend it on anything they need. And as we underfund them in another division of this bill today, they are probably going to need that 10% to cover other things in their budgets. This gives, in educational services, $0 to the AEAs. The districts can use those any way they choose. $0 to the AEAs for media services. With the funding, year 1, 100% of AEAs get 100% of the funding. Year 2, they get the 90%, as I just said. In the media services, year 1, the AEAs get 40% of the funding. 60% goes to the districts, and that year 2 is 0% funding, all of it going to the districts. AEAs are required to provide media services, but with no funding. That's on page 5, line 11. So, how can you provide these services without any guaranteed money? It's a question that AEAs are going to be asking after we vote today. Purchasing for media services, ed services, and special ed services are going to be outside the AEA region if they are contiguous to the districts or if they share a superintendent. So they can use a different AEA than what's in their area. Professional development, there will be no funding, but it is still required. AEAs can only provide that service to the schools if it has been approved by the Department of Ed director, who is untested and unproven. The AEA professional development states, or the funding and the local levy is eliminated completely. So the director of DE director is required to develop and distribute to public and private schools a list of evidence-based professional development services that AEA would be allowed to provide, but again, with 0 funding. I don't know how AEA staff can deliver PD if they are losing their jobs because there's no funding. So AEAs are still keeping the TSS and sharing incentives. The House Republicans have still, just so you know, not part of this bill. It is still part of the standings that the AEAs every year are going to continue to lose $32.5 million this year out of special ed funding. So again, that's more funding away from the special eds when we get to that portion of the year, not in this bill, but later on. There's a second division, which is the special education division, that is opening up 62 new state employee positions, expanding the government here. Some of those will be directly here in Des Moines, overseeing the AEAs, and then 40 of those staff will end up being out in the field in the AEAs. But again, 12 of those or 13 of those FTEs are going to be solely oversight of the AEAs, not people who are going to be directly affecting special education and the services that they need. That's a lot of funding. The third area is the department expanded duties. Oh, sorry, that's not the third area. The third area would be the teacher salary. We have multiple options here. We could just throw this bill out, and there is another bill that has a better option for teacher salary out there. This one is closer to the governor's wanting, as is the AEA section of the bill, which is worse than the original bill in the House, and I believe that was, I don't have that number here right now, but so it was HF 2630, which offered a much better teacher salary. I believe everybody here, given the opportunity today to vote on that bill instead, would be a yes. But what's being offered in this particular bill is not good enough. The fourth area of this bill is the SSA. 3%'s already been voted on in the House. We didn't do anything over here yet, but I had been in discussions with education people on the other side that said that it would be no less than 3%. But yet today you're going to stand by and say 2.5 is okay. 2.5 in my district alone will put 2 school districts into, well, they'll have to raise property taxes, plain and simply. Linn-Mar would have to raise $50,000 in property taxes more, and Marion Independent would be $170,000 just because of the 2.5 versus 3%. So that budget guarantee, I'm sure all of your districts are going to be in that same boat where they're going to have to add to their funding somehow, and that's going to come from property taxes. So there are 4 areas here, and if we were given the opportunity to vote on each of these separately, I think today might be a little different. There might be a few yeses on some of the sections, but because it is the way it is today, I know that I will be a no on this bill, not because I don't want to raise teachers' pay, because I certainly do. They deserve it. But the AEAs also deserve a better hand than what this is dealing them. And the SSA, our schools, our kids deserve far more. So I'm going to tell you again, nobody wanted this bill. Nobody asked for this bill. No one campaigned on this bill anywhere in Iowa. We were asked to do a task force and determine what, if anything, needs to be done. We were asked to slow down, give it a year, give it time to figure out exactly what needs to change, if anything at all. You rolled 4 parts into one bill, 4 separate titles, 4 separate issues into one bill, forcing a vote on all of them at once. The Department of Education is not local, and the positions are not going to reflect local needs. There is no answer of how special education positions at the Department of Ed are going to actually increase special education scores. If you remember, that's how we started this in the first place, to raise special education scores. Today, this bill talks nothing about that at all. There's nowhere in this bill do I see how it's going to raise special education scores. We have received thousands of emails. I have people who are writing me from your districts who are asking why you're not listening. Of those 1,000 emails I have personally received, there are so many stories in there of people who know what's going to happen to their child with special needs because of these cuts. And I know you're going to say they aren't cuts, but they are when you no longer have people at the AEAs able to give those services because the funding isn't there. This bill has taken the focus off of special education and included 3 more divisions. It has huge errors in it that the House admitted this weekend alone at their forums that will hurt kids, such as the mental health funding and funding for autism and behavioral health that are gone with the education section of AEAs that will be removed along with media services, the general ed portion. This undercuts the SSA to the schools. It undercuts special education funding. It lowers the teachers' pay. How is this better than what we had had before? How is this better than what the House had? Folks, this is worse. This is worse for our kids. It's worse for our school districts, and it's really going to hurt a lot of your rural districts. With this version of the bill, there is less than 4 months to implement all of the moving parts. Schools got to have an answer here pretty soon about what they need to have in place for next year. New positions need to be trained, filled, and a plan to increase those special education scores somewhere. I assume that's what we're going to try to do. This is unreasonable to believe that this can be done in that short of time, and it's creating a much bigger problem than we had in the past. Local control, once again, being stripped away from the districts because they rely on those bigger districts being part of this funding process to create an equitable distribution of resources and services to students across Iowa, regardless of where they live. Many of our districts and smaller communities do not have those services available to them to outsource locally. This bill grows the Department of Ed's control and strips local authority in multiple places, such as professional development, which is the bulk share of what the school districts currently use for that development. They will now have to have everything that they do approved by the director of the Department of Education rather than by the needs of the local communities. This adds dozens of new positions to the state, growing the Department of Ed, growing the government in the state of Iowa. And they will be making most of those decisions for our local communities. The Director of Education, who is untested and not highly qualified with their educational background, has too much control over the AEA and funding when she has no background to support her in this duty. This bill began as a bill about special ed. I'm going to bring it back to special ed every time because that's what we were supposed to be talking about. But it's become a bill about a system that serves districts in both rural and urban. And we all know that the urban districts have more availability of goods and services to them if they choose to opt out of the AEAs, leading our rural districts in the system that could collapse due to the uncertainty of the funding. Again, AEAs were put in place by Senator Grassley 50 years ago. They were put together by him and others to ensure that all children in the state of Iowa, no matter where they lived in rural or urban, were receiving equity of services and opportunities for their educational experiences. If and when some of those larger districts pull out of the AEAs, rural districts are going to lose out because of that pulling of resources. Once again, will collapse the system with uncertainty. This bill will also hurt the workforce, making it more difficult to find people to fill AEA services and, quite frankly, special education jobs, because we depend on those services to support us in helping our children achieve. And again, the goal was to get higher special education scores. This is going to make it harder. A lot's changed since the governor's speech was given that first week. And this process has damaged morale for the AEA staff, parents, communities, teachers, your constituents. And today, this bill is even worse than what you passed last week without constituent approval. Communities are struggling to maintain their schools districts right now just because of the lack, or the vouchers last year and the lack of fully funding for years. And now that trust level of the communities for this body to do what the community needs is gone. They asked you not to do the vouchers last year. They asked you not to do culture war bills. They've asked you to leave the AEAs alone and just do a task force. But what the GOP has done is crammed 4 important entities into one bill, all that deserved their day and their voice to be heard individually. This is a haphazard bill with huge errors from the original bills that were out there, which hurt marginalized communities in our schools even further. We work for the people, not special interests, and certainly not for the governor. This body owes so much more than this legislation to their constituents. We still have an opportunity to vote this down today and do a more reasonable SSA that we know is already ready to go and available for us to vote on. We still have an opportunity to vote on a decent teacher pay raise by bringing up HF 2630. We could bring that forward. It's better. You have that opportunity if you really want to give a teacher pay raise. By dropping this bill today, the AEAs would have a year to revamp and fix areas of concern for the handful of people who actually had a problem with the AEAs, not the majority of people who knew that there was no big issues. But by doing this bill today, what you are saying to your constituents is they don't matter. What they say doesn't matter. That you serve the governor and not the people. Vote this down, please. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Selsey.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, here we are. Ladies and gentlemen of the Iowa Senate, I'm going to say this as plainly as I can. 2%, 2.5% is not enough. The bill before you claims to meet the requirements of our local public schools, but drastically falls short of the real needs we see in our communities. Investing in strong public schools is an investment in our children, in our workforce, in the health of our communities, from the smallest towns to the biggest cities. But this proposal refuses to make that investment. In fact, it funds our public schools at half the amount the state is now throwing at private schools. Half. Last night, I had the honor of reading a couple of readings at the Pioneer Lawmakers service. And it struck me how many of our colleagues from years gone by served on the education committees in this chamber. We even had, it looks like at one time, a higher education committee, besides a regular education committee, which makes sense because that's how important it is. We should have a separate focus on it. I have a feeling those Pioneer lawmakers, if they were here today, would be very disappointed in the members of this body for passing this garbage. I want to talk more about the 2.5% that's being put forth in this bill to fund our public schools. It's just not enough. On a normal year where inflation is not high, it's not enough. In any year, it's not enough. We are consistently and continually underfunding our public schools every year, and this bill just makes it worse. Now it scrambles all the other funding that is normally separated for special education and AEAs. It scrambles it all up and makes it a big mess. There are people right now who know in Iowa that we are taking money away from their school districts and their services. There are services that are completely missing from this bill that we already know of. Just imagine what we'll find 6 months from now that we inadvertently left out. And I'm not saying we, you inadvertently left out. Let me be clear. Funding schools at half the amount our state will allocate to private school vouchers is not only unjust, it's wholly inadequate. Private school vouchers will cost over $300 million in their first 2 years alone. Taxpayer giveaway that we are planning here is going to divert money out of the state treasury directly and constrict what this legislature can provide to our public schools. So people who tell you that this money comes out of some sort of magical separate pot are wrong. It all comes out of the same pot. And it's getting drained right now by this bill. Tell you what, History has shown us time and again that funneling public funds into private school vouchers will only help a small sliver of students, while neglecting what was the vast majority we had to rely on for our public schools. Studies have consistently demonstrated that a statewide voucher program in other states does not lead to any significant achievement improvement at all. Our communities and other students all students deserve better. They deserve a fully funded public education system that provides opportunities for all, regardless of socioeconomic status or geographic location. That's what our funding tries to do, is be equitable to everyone, including AEA funding that we had in place for many years. I implore my colleagues to consider what the House has passed and acknowledge that we can and should do better by local students and our local communities. There's pieces missing all over this bill, and we already know what they are. So let's fix them. This is our opportunity. We can just ignore it, or we can fix it. And I bet you thought I was going to not talk about Mackenzie Snow, but you're wrong. I went to her kind of confirmation hearing, whatever it is, this morning. It was interesting. I listened to the questions very carefully that were being asked to Ms. Snow. She basically ignored the questions that were directly asked to her and tap danced around them like she is very good at doing. I've heard lots of information about how the Department of Ed already has capacity problems, big ones. I'll give you a couple specific examples. During the book banning era, I'll call that the book banning era, the Department of Ed was directed to but refused to provide book banning guidance to schools or a list of LGBTQ books that were being ordered to be pulled off the shelves. So our teachers and our administrators and our librarians were flying blind. Up until now, the Department of Ed has been a non-entity in our public education system, really irrelevant. And now a completely unqualified person is going to take over and be in charge of the AEA system and the Department of Public Education. That sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. We have a chance, colleagues, to fix this, or at least help fix it. We are choosing not to do that. And to me, that is very disturbing. We are taking our responsibility and throwing it out the window. Vote no to this bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Johnson, Senator Weiner.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, a lot of verbiage has been spilled over this in emails that we've received and speeches we've given on the floor, and obviously more are coming today. This bill before us is a violation of the single subject rule, also sometimes known as political log rolling. Under our Constitution, a bill has to have a single subject. It's precisely to prevent legislators from packaging together diverse pieces of legislation to ensure that a majority of lawmakers will support something in the bill and give it their approval, or perhaps be afraid to vote against one part of it, like, say, putting teacher pay in with the AEAs, or must pass school funding, SSA, which we've never been offered the chance to vote on this session in a timely manner. This is unconstitutional in Iowa. Article 3, Section 29 of the Iowa Constitution requires that a bill be a single subject. This is not a single subject bill. Senator Donahue mentioned it. It was already a violation last week when Senate Republicans passed the Senate version with at least 2 subjects. It's worse now. It's a 4-subject bill: AEAs, special ed, SSA, school funding, teacher and parapay. separate bills that we should be voting on and considering separately. The whole reason against this sort of act is what we have seen with this. Senate Republican leadership, House Republican leadership, the governor get together in a back room, decide, hash out a deal. The only way they can is that this infringes on the Iowa Constitution's home rule provision.
You may
Apologies.
continue.
Thank you very much, Madam President. A separate legal issue is that this infringes on the Iowa Constitution's home rule provision. The original draft of SSB 3073 included language striking area education agencies from the definition of political subdivision from Iowa Code Section 257.11. While that language isn't in the current bill, it's a tell that what's happening is an unconstitutional usurpation of traditional local control of a completely local activity. This version also takes away a political subdivision's, the AEA's, right to self-governance and makes it merely advisory. That would be like saying, hey, City Council, we're going to centralize all your planning and zoning, as well as public works and parks and rec. You just get to give an advisory opinion, but we'll make those decisions here in Des Moines. And making chunks of this effective this July? Are you kidding me? Change a whole system that operates for thousands of kids in just a few months. We couldn't even pass SSA in 3 months. On the school funding part, it's cumulative. And we're seeing the toll that underfunding takes. We're seeing teacher and staffing cuts. And those are last resorts because districts have been paring back other resources for years. You know all those economic figures my colleague Senator Quirmbach has discussed? Well, they're coming home to roost. 2.5% comes nowhere near to meeting rising costs. Let me tell you a story about a small elementary school in the community of Hills. It has remained open for decades because the school district chose to allocate funding there. It was always small. It hasn't been economically viable for decades, but it's been important for the community. It has produced excellent results, and so the district maintained it. It's still important for the community, but 2.5% school SSA funding won't cut it. The 3% the House originally passed wouldn't have saved it. Maybe, just maybe, 6% would have, as we were going to introduce an amendment to school funding, had we had a separate bill. But the last 7 years have taken their toll. It's before the school board tonight. And I don't know what they're going to decide, but I'll tell you what. If the decision is to close it, it's because of funding decisions you in this legislature right here have made since 2017. And if then the instinct is to blame local entities, think what a business perspective would be. A business would have considered subsidizing a small branch like that for so many years to be mismanagement. But Hills has stayed because though it cost more money, it was the right thing to do for the kids. Add to the mix vouchers and unlimited appropriations, and here's what you have. Hills Elementary has 120 kids. The elementary school closest to me in the district has 391 kids. And with current funding levels, even that may be too small now. Economies of scale, it's the only option now. The only option. And you know that special ed shadow I talked about last week that I did? That was in Mid Prairie, in Wellman, in Washington County. It's a great school district, good schools, dedicated teachers, and a special ed specialty. It's also a huge rural district that covers 220 square miles. I desperately want those schools and those kids to continue to thrive. You all should too. They deserve to. But they already have unfilled positions, unfilled special ed positions with no applicants. And what about all those Iowans who've written and called about the AEAs of all political persuasions from all corners of the state? Passionate, caring, worried, scared. They're Iowans, and we represent them all. They're not hyperbole. And what about our kids? What about Iowa's kids? If this bill, this amendment that we're discussing today is the result of a backroom compromise among Senate Republican leadership, House Republican leadership, and the governor, and everybody, each of those gets something, guess who doesn't get something? Iowa's kids. How about those on the autism spectrum? Those who need assistive devices that were accidentally left out of the bill, out of this amendment, because it's media services, and now we can't amend it or fix it. What about gifted and talented? None of those are hyperbole. They are people. They are Iowans. And why, colleagues, are we letting the House push us into voting on something we don't want? Send it back. Force it to conference committee. Any system can be improved. No arguments there. We are citizen legislators. We don't know better. We don't have this expertise. The governor doesn't know better, but a properly constituted task force would. Any CEO or administrator would tell us that's how to proceed. Otherwise, it's like some giant, carefully constructed Jenga tower. You pull enough blocks out, you know what happens. Or maybe think of it this way. Have you ever been into a china shop? One of those stores with so many breakable items? Well, the AEAs and special ed and all the other services they provide and our school districts together are like a big china shop, all together, all leaning on one another. You topple one piece, others will fall and break. And remember the signs posted in those shops. You break it, you've bought it. A superintendent of 2 rural districts asked me to tell you this. It's wrong for us to push something Iowans do not want. It was not a campaign any of you ran on and knew about before session. It's a national playbook, and it's wrong to do this. And small rural school districts who need AEA support to do the daily work will suffer. Vote no. Would Senator Donahue yield?
Senator Donahue, would you yield?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator, could you describe briefly district's obligations to students under the ADA and the Rehab Act?
So district obligations is to provide the services that are written into the IEP, which is the individualized education plan for each student. So they are different for every student, depending on what those students' needs are.
So the government or the individual school districts are obliged to provide that regardless of what funding they have to every student?
Yes, so regardless of what is provided, special education teachers will have to figure out a way to provide every single one of those services written in an IEP because it is under the federal guidance.
Thank you very much. Would Senator Evans yield?
Senator Evans, would you yield?
Yes.
Senator Weiner, you're in order.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Evans. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit of the history of the AEAs.
Sure. In 1974, the AEAs were put into place, and their main objective was to support school districts, not only in special ed, but in ed services, which are professional development and a few other things, as well as media services. Those were the three areas that they were charged to do. During that time period, there were 15, now there are 9, and the Department of Education was still responsible for the oversight of special education back in 1974, and that continued until roughly 25 years later. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Senator. So as Senator Evans said, 50 years ago, the Iowa legislature and an Iowa governor decided to guarantee a quality and equal education for all kids in Iowa. They decided that a zip code, a disability, or school district revenues could never be an impediment to the right to public education in Iowa. Governor Robert Ray signed these values into law. That right changed our people and our state, and it opened up worlds of opportunities for Iowa's kids for generations. It has made this state what it is. Since 2017, this Iowa Republican trifecta has had its knives out for public education. For the life of me, I will never understand why. So many of us in this chamber and our kids and grandkids have benefited from it. But if you want to change course, now is the time. I suggest you take a hard look at the Republican trifecta that created the area education agencies and look carefully at the consequential vote you will soon take. This isn't a defense of some government agency for its own sake. This is a defense of Iowa values of equality in education under the law. And if all the emails and forums and talking to families, moms and dads, grandparents, urban folks, rural folks, Republicans and independents as well as Democrats doesn't move you, then maybe you can transport yourself back 50 years to listen to your counterparts in a previous Republican trifecta who created the AEAs. They did a wonderful thing for Iowa students and families, for this state. They created a system, as I said, that so many of us in this chamber and our kids and grandkids have benefited from. We wouldn't be who we are and where we are without them. All of us here today in the Iowa Senate can defend our kids' rights, and we can all defend that important legacy. You can defend Iowa's values. I urge this body to vote no on this bill.
The chair recognizes the senator from Lynn, Senator McClintock.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon, Madam President and my Senate colleagues. Let me say, first of all, I'm going to be quoting some folks today, and in the interest of time, I'm going to footnote, I'm not going to footnote every resource, but I'm happy to provide them later if needs be. I rise in opposition to this bill, and on behalf of my district, and truth be told, the people of the state of Iowa. In my 4 years in the legislature, I've seen several unpopular bills, but this is the first one that not only is universally disliked by both parties, but overwhelmingly one-sided in its opposition to passage. And based on the content and input that I've received, I can say with some confidence that no one really likes this bill. The very idea of dismantling and defunding the area education agencies has upset and offended the people in Iowa to a whole nother level. Literally, generations of Iowans have benefited from the services and support of the AEAs. According to our own legislative website, the AEAs have been serving children, families, and educators since 1974. The Iowa legislature established Iowa's area education agencies in 1974 to identify and serve children from birth to age 21 who require special education services. Today, this regional system of 9 AEAs provides effective, efficient, and economical solutions to schools, families, and educators, and supports the developmental and learning needs of all children, including those with disabilities. Now, I was born in 1970, so I don't remember with clarity who did what, but luckily I went to college and I learned how to do research. Turns out that a couple Republicans, it was a couple Republicans that made the AEAs happen. And the first one I want to talk about, he did some really good things, including collective bargaining, well, depending on what you think, the bottle bill, and civil rights. But he also did good things for the schools. He revamped and expanded funding for K through 12 public education. While Governor Ray was governor, funding for Iowa's K through 12 schools expanded and reduced its reliance on property taxes, which is SSA, which is what it is today, which is included in this bill. The IASB said, "We believe supplemental state aid is a critical component in student success by providing districts with adequate general fund resources. We call for improvements in the state policy to ensure this funding addresses inflation, provides market competitive wages for teachers and staff, is equitable across program areas, and for the area education agencies, our AEAs, and allows flexibility to address demographic changes within schools." So who actually created the AEAs? Well, in the Iowa legislature, it was then Senator Grassley who wrote the legislation that formed the network of Iowa AEAs that exists today to ensure that all Iowa schools have access to services for students with disabilities. In 2002, just 2 years ago, U.S. Senator Grassley was named, quote, "friend of the AEAs," end quote, and he had this to say at a ceremony which I believe was in Washington, D.C. I'm quoting him now. "I've always had a passion for helping the next generation of leaders succeed. I led the charge to create AEAs when I served in the Iowa legislature, and I've enjoyed watching the success and profound impact these agencies have had on education in our state. It's an honor to work on behalf of Iowa students in the Senate, and I'll continue doing my part to ensure that they have the resources needed to reach their full potential," end quote. Senator Grassley is in my district right now. He's over in Benton County. Obviously, I'm not attending with him. I'm here today, but he's just listening to the people, hearing what they have to say on the issues. Probably this issue is probably being discussed right now. So I thought I'd let you hear from a few people within my district. I have some emails here. I received thousands. I'm not going to read them all, just a few. And I'm not even going to read the whole emails, just a few highlights. This is from Linda in Fairfax. She starts out her email by saying, "Charlie, I want to thank you so much for your continued support with the AEAs." She has 17 years as a speech language pathologist at Grantwood AEA. And I read the portion that says thank you because it's a continual theme throughout the emails where she thanks me, and that'll come up again later. This one's from Tracy, where she says, "Senator McClintock, I met you earlier this year at a forum at Cedar Rapids School District Central Office, and I was impressed with your willingness to listen. Please listen to the people of Iowa and vote no on the bill." This one comes from Stacy, who's a coordinator of digital learning and media services for Grantwood AEA. She said, "I had to take time away from the AEA bill for my own mental health as I work in more than just one job, and it has taken an emotional toll on me. I appreciate you listening to those that you serve and not just following party lines. I wonder, though, is this really a party issue? Because I received many, many emails from Republicans as well on this issue, as well as talked to many of them in my district. And my district is evenly matched with Republican and Democrat. This is from Stephanie. She writes, the current legislation threatens to undermine the effectiveness, she mentions efficiency as well, effectiveness of the AEAs by jeopardizing the resources necessary to fulfill their crucial mission. This could significantly impede our ability as service providers to deliver essential support to the children who rely on us. Furthermore, the inclusion of matters such as teacher pay and paraeducator compensation within broader educational policies is concerning. As Republicans, we value transparency and accountability in governance, and bundling these issues together may obscure the true implications of the legislation. And then finally from Alice, who's a special education teacher, she says, I'm frightened how the rural districts are going to be able to handle this and the effect that it will have. Also a Republican. So you can see the common thread there is that they want to thank us for listening. And like I tell the folks that I see at many of my forums and in public that I talk to, they don't have to thank me, you see, because I'm an elected employee of the people. Some people say we're politicians or elected officials. Well, I'm an elected employee of the people paid by the state. All of the people. And trust me, I do listen to the people within my district. You know, all political power is inherent to the people. Yes, I'm certain I read that somewhere once. And we have a duty to listen to them. In closing, let me say that I don't think the governor was wrong in calling for a review of the AEAs. I just think the AEAs are not only fully capable, but completely willing to review their processes without this legislation being forced upon them. And the debate over this issue should be taking place in a conference room somewhere with AEA chiefs and school administrators, and not in the chambers of the Capitol by lawmakers. But here we are, debating it today. And the purpose of the debate should always be to achieve progress and never to achieve victory on a voting board, especially when it comes to life-changing legislation. And although I know this bill is going to pass today, I'm still going to hold out to the very last push of the button and hope that some miracle that we will defeat the measure on the floor and show Iowa we actually listen. Because when this bill passes and the governor signs it, which she will do, our only reward will be the disappointment and anxiety of many AEA employees, teachers, parents, and students. So on behalf of the people I represent, and keeping my word to them, the senator from District 42 will be a no on the AEA bill. Thank you, Madam President.
The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Bolton.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise in opposition to this amendment and legislation as well. What a deal we have here today. And what is behind door number 3? A bill that is an incredible example of a broken legislative process. Our area education agencies and the kids that they serve and support deserve a much better fate than this. This bill that's been a ping pong ball bouncing back and forth between the House and the Senate, only to become the deal of the day today. This hasn't ever been about what's best for Iowa kids. This has been about what's the best political deal we can get cut right now. That's it. That's what has happened here. Cutting a deal just to get something passed. The policy took a back seat to all of it. It's just trade-offs now. We could have done the right thing. We had an amendment to do the right thing, set up a study committee, learn more about what our AEAs are doing and how better to support the services they provide, that road wasn't taken. No, we are here now debating the deal of the day. And we have to do it fast because votes might disappear when people start learning more and more about how bad the deal of the day is. That's what's going on here today. And the casualties don't just affect the AEA services that we've talked about. You've lumped in inadequate school funding to sweeten the pot. Make two issues go away at the same time. There's a deal. Never mind what our school districts have had to do year in and year out dealing with systemic underfunding. Again and again, adjusting budgets, trying to keep up, only be told yet again, here's another package. You're not going to like it. It's going to be inadequate, but it's the deal of the day. But wait, there's more. We're going to have a provision here for teacher pay. Never mind, it's a one-size-fits-all approach with no real vision for the future. And never mind the fact that it's a whole situation created back in 2017 when an all-GOP legislature passed a bill that said to our educators they couldn't have conversations with administrators in their local community to determine the best salary, wages, benefits for their district. And we told you then, there's going to be a shortage of teachers. There's going to be a problem with staffing our schools because you're not allowing teachers and staff to determine the best fit for their salaries, wages, and benefits. And now here comes this one-size-fits-all approach because it's the best deal you could get lumped into this package. You're scrambling to fix the problems that you've broken, the things that you have created as a mess in this state with our education system. And now we get one bad bill here. Lump it all together. Iowa kids, our educators, deserve a better deal than this.
The chair recognizes the senator from Blackhawk, Senator Dotzler.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in opposition to this bill. And, I spoke earlier on the media service portion of it, and I didn't think that my colleagues who support this really understood how important media services were. And it turns out that you have negotiated with the House an even worse position, because after year one, all money goes away from the AEAs for media services, and it's up to the local districts to purchase them back. Well, with the way this bill has allowable growth funding, SSA, not even keeping up with inflation, school districts are going to have to siphon off some of their resources that they have for special education just to maintain what they have. And the end result is people with disabilities are going to get the short end of the stick. We had, just as one example, I'm always interested in workforce development and making sure that we have the right type of people to get the job done. And this bill is running talented people out of the state of Iowa in these areas. But one thing that you might not be aware of that I learned on a visit was that as part of the media services, they were working with young students that had disabilities to work with corporations like to understand how to sort things. And major companies in Iowa contributed a bunch of old plastic cards that you could, use for purchases that were outdated. And they mixed them all up. And so this one company, they had individuals go and sort them all out, learn how to sort things, being able to provide for themselves. I had a good friend of mine, fellow legislator, his brother had Down syndrome and passed away. And it was through his work, through the AEAs, that he was able to work at Goodwill and had money in his pocket. And now, you put a bill together that deeply offends me in a lot of ways. And one is, you have taken away my ability to stand here and support something I deeply care about. Senator Weiner talked about the term log rolling. Senate Republicans got caught with log rolling a few years ago in a Supreme Court case. The Iowa Supreme Court basically stated that Iowa Senate Republicans violated a provision in the Iowa Constitution that says each bill must address a single subject. That definition is this: log rolling occurs when a provision unrelated to the core of the bill and not itself capable of attaining a majority support is tied to a popular bill having majority support. This bill is trying to log roll me. And I had a lumber business in northern Idaho way back when, so I pay a lot of attention to the lumber industry. And log rolling actually is a competition that they play from the old days of floating logs down a river, and you might have seen it. You have one person on an end of a log and another person at the other, both trying to hold their position. And they start spinning the log to try to throw the other one off where they stand. That's what log rolling is about. So you have a bill here that I'm definitely against, and there's a good number of Republicans in this chamber that are against the AEA part. But teacher salaries is something that should be passed. And there's no reason why you couldn't have done it, because in the Iowa House, they passed a bill out of there 93-1. 93-1 for teacher salaries. You could have brought that up and we could have been out of here in 5 minutes. But no, we're going to try to roll you off that log. We're going to get you off your position because Senator Dotzler, the next election, will be able to say, you voted against teacher salaries on House File 2612, and you won't be telling a lie, because I'm going to vote against the whole bill, even though I support teacher salaries. That's what's wrong with doing this kind of thing. Supplemental aid's another one. We should be having debates and conversations on it. But no, you can, just because you got the power to do it. Now, fellow senators, when you look at the vote in the House, one vote determining this position. And I know there's a senator, and more than one, that is hoping some miracle will happen, that you will finally understand that maybe we ought to not do this. We can still come back and put that study together and really work through this. Because I'll guarantee you, you poll your individual districts and you're voting against them today, unless you're going to be on the minority side. This bill is the wrong thing for now, and you're doing it the wrong way. And I'm going to tell you, you're not rolling me off the log. I'm a no.
The chair recognizes the senator from Scott, Senator Winkler.
Thank you, Madam President. As I listened to this debate and as I followed all of the debate on this bill, I think about how we have continued to shortchange our students, shortchange our children throughout the state of Iowa, and how, as we move forward, we really are shortchanging the future. I was reminded this weekend of how our AEA was instrumental when our Davenport schools had a conditional accreditation. And it was our AEAs that stepped up, that worked with us. And it wasn't just the special education department that helped us in regard to our conditional accreditation, but it was also the leadership in school finance. It was professional development that is completely eliminated the funding for professional development with this AEA bill. And the professional development wasn't just for teachers, it was for administrators. And as we move forward, that is completely eliminated. The jeopardy that was created with our Davenport School District was the misunderstanding on fiscal responsibility as well as the over-identification of African Americans in special education. And we learned and we were able to come back from that conditional accreditation. None of those resources will be available to our school district should we get into that situation again, which I don't think we will because we learned and we grew from it, but they will not be available to any school district moving forward. That continuous learning of for new superintendents as they grow and develop in their new role as a superintendent will not be available as a result of what we are doing today. And the benefit that students will receive from the leadership that superintendent provides is in jeopardy. And then I think about the lack of adequate funding. We have had a decade of inadequate funding. The students that graduated from high school last year have never had adequate funding their entire career if they went through the school districts in Iowa. Our school districts have had to do more with less and less and less and less. And that really was what we saw with the Guidehouse report, except the focus was on the wrong things. Because the Guidehouse report, not knowing anything about the education system in the state of Iowa because they were housed in Virginia, put the focus on the AEAs. But AEAs don't teach special education students. The teachers in the classroom work with special education students, directly related to the funding that we provide to our K-12 schools. So shortchanging students shortchanges our education and our children's future. Kind of full circle with what we're talking about. It really is a sad day today. The future of leadership in our school systems, the future of access to services for our special education students and their families, adequate funding for our schools, the opportunity for our students to learn and grow in an environment with rich resources, kind of one fell swoop of failing, of understanding of a legislature that doesn't understand what we're doing and not taking our responsibility to truly lead this state. Last week, I failed at sharing with you a story that was given to me, and many of you are farmers, and I certainly respect the role and don't really have a clue as to how hard you work, but respect that, and I wanted to make sure that I did justice to that story, and it was from John and Mary that had emailed me earlier, and I think that this really does sum up where we are with at least the AEA portion. And it said this would be the AEA component. This would be like telling John that you can farm and choose any seed that you want at no extra cost. But you don't get the sprayer, the combine, the wagons for hauling the grain or the equipment to till the land. And the seed that you are selecting to plant will be overseen by someone who has never listened to the experience of others that might be able to help you with your yield. All the other areas that you need are still available to you, but you have to find the budget to pay for those services because they are no longer free or at cost. The semi that is used to haul your grain is no longer available, and it is being sold and under the direction of someone else, and you'll need to find another solution to haul that grain. But don't worry, we didn't increase the cost of your seed, and we gave you a choice. How would that make you feel as a farmer? That is the position that you are putting our AEAs and our schools in. It's no choice at all. Vote no on this bill.
The chair recognizes the senator from Dallas, Senator Trone Garriott.
Thank you, Madam President. This has not been a careful process of consideration. These are not evidence-based strategies shown to improve education outcomes for anyone, let alone special education students. Republican majority leadership has just been throwing things at the wall. Several Republican members from the House acknowledged publicly over the weekend that there are problems with their most recent version because it was so rushed, mistakes that should be fixed, but they voted for it anyway. And so many in this chamber will vote for this too. The House's sloppy seconds. Because the unvarnished truth is this is a desperate attempt to pass something, anything, as soon as possible to please the governor. This isn't about what Iowans want. This has not been about what Iowans need. The purpose was never making Iowa education better. And everyone in here and everyone out there knows it. The people have spoken loudly, clearly, repeatedly. in every way that they could think of. And the majority party is not listening. The governor has their ear. But Iowans, there are people here at the Capitol who have heard you. There are people here who care. Your advocacy has made a difference. Your stories matter to us. Your kids, your schools, your educators, your communities matter so much to us. It matters to us who are voting no on these harmful changes. And we are a bipartisan group, united against this terrible idea across party lines in both chambers. There are a good number of Republicans who are putting the people of Iowa first and voting no. So to all the parents who have been fighting so hard for their kids, I know you'll keep fighting, because that's what you do. And all the educators and specialists and administrators who are bringing your whole heart to your work every single day, even though this hurts, we know you'll still be putting your kids and your colleagues first today, like every day. And to the members of the public who have showed up in the legislative process just like you were supposed to, just like you were meant to, in emails and letters and visits and phone calls and forums and protests, I know you are angry and I know you are frustrated, but take heart. This is by no means your last opportunity to speak. Keep speaking. All of Iowa will hear your voice loud and clear in November. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Story, Senator Cornbach.
Well, thank you, Madam President. We've been talking about this AEA bill for quite a long time, and that's what it is. It's an AEA bill. There are other issues that have been mixed in, but the focus of the attention and the focus of our attention needs to be on the area education agencies and the students that they serve. I argued last week that that approach is flawed end to end. The data that supposedly support this effort turns out to be statistically insignificant in most areas. There was no effort at all to identify the causes of the supposed problem, no analysis of the AEA's internal functioning, no analysis of how well they work with school districts that actually do the teaching. And so the recommendations that were forthcoming were completely untethered and completely unconnected to any analysis of the problem or the causes of that problem, supposed problem. And of course, there was no analysis of the unintended consequences. You know, if this had been a medical situation, this is like a doctor who prescribes chemotherapy for a hangnail. That doctor would be out of a job in a hurry. And the people proposing this should be out of a job in a hurry as well. I want to now talk a little bit about the other pieces that have been commingled with this. We've talked a lot here about underfunding of our public schools. Well, that underfunding is no longer a rhetorical exercise. It's come home. Headline last week, Linn-Mar, the Linn-Mar School District, cutting 19 teachers and 31 staff, cites underfunding from the state. The reality is hitting home. It's not just a discussion about dollars and cents. It's about discussion of teachers being laid off, let go. That means that class sizes will rise, that students' individual attention will decrease, their needs will be less well met. because we are underfunding. Because we are underfunding. I would love to support an increase in teacher salary. And we have a vehicle to do that. A week or two ago, earlier this month, House File 2630 came over from the House on a vote of 93-1. Very strong, almost unanimous, very strong bipartisan support. And I'm sure that if we put that bill to a vote here, we would get the same sort of huge bipartisan support. But you know, you have to ask, why is it necessary to do teacher funding? Well, the reason is that we have been underfunding education throughout the Reynolds administration, falling behind inflation almost every year. Cumulatively now, we're down about 10%. If we had adequately funded our schools, I'm sure that they would have devoted a good share of that money to teacher salary, and we wouldn't need a separate bill for that subject. It would also help with the AEA problem, supposed problem. As Senator Winkler said, the teaching is actually done in the schools. And when we short fund the schools, we don't meet the needs of all of the students, but especially the highest needs students. Relative to inflation, compared to 7 years ago, each of our regular program kids this year alone is being shorted $900. But the special ed kids, they get a higher weighting. Level 1 special ed, just short of $1,500 per kid. Level 2, about $2,000 this year. And level 3 kids, the neediest of the needy, $3,362 are being shorted this year relative to inflation. You think that special ed kids are underperforming? I don't think the data really substantiate that, but if you want to help them out, fund all the schools so that Linn-Mar doesn't have to lay off 19 teachers and 31 support people. And other school districts are facing similar dilemmas. Now, it's easy to predict what the Republican response is to this. It's as tired as it is misguided. The oldest of the old war horses is going back 15 years and saying, well, there was a time when Democrats didn't fully fund the education authorization. What people who cite that don't quite understand is that if you got to go back 15 years to make your point, you've already lost the argument. And what they won't tell you is that 15 years ago, we were suffering from a budget crisis which was of no making of any Iowan. It was a result of the George W. Bush Republican administration crashing the national economy. Stock market down 40% in 1 year, unemployment skyrocketing to 10%, banks, brokerage houses teetering on the verge, some of them actually collapsing, some of them being sold off at fire sale prices. Yes, we had to make some tough decisions here in Iowa. The next year, the recession rolled into Iowa, and between March and October, the Revenue Estimating Conference reduced our forecast revenue by 8%. It only took them about 7 months to do that calculation. And yes, we had to make some tough decisions. Republicans, had they been in charge at that time, they would have had to make the same tough decisions. It wasn't just education that got shorted. Because of the incompetence of the Bush administration, we had to cut darn near everything. Yes, we made some tough decisions, and we'll take responsibility for that. But we'll also take the recognition, because the next year the credit rating agencies raised our state's credit rating to AAA across the board. It don't get no better than that. Our response to the worst recession since the Great Depression was an increase in our credit rating. Throughout that period, notwithstanding that 1 or 2 years of tough decisions, throughout that period, we generally made a 4% increase in our per pupil funding. The other Republican response is to say, well, we're putting more money in every year. Okay, I thought I put that one to rest last week. If your boss gives you a $1,000 raise, but your family's cost of living goes up $3,000, you're going to have to make some cuts to balance your family budget. Yes, you have a few more dollars, but not enough to cover the increasing cost. And that's not just true of families, that's true of businesses, that's true of farms. If your revenue is increasing, but your costs are increasing faster, a business is going to have to lay off people. They're going to have to defer maintenance. The farm is going to have to postpone acquisition of new implements. And schools are going to have to lay off teachers and support staff. Linn-Mar is dealing with the problem right now, and in a way that is going to reduce the quality of education that they have. One last observation. It was noted last week, supposedly justifying our priority on education that represented, 56 or 57% of the state budget. Well, I've been around a few years. I go back to the administration of Tom Vilsack. In those years, our school funding was up around 59%. If it's down to 56 or 57, that's an indicator of the deprioritization. Thank you for making my case for me. I would love to pick up House File 2630 on teacher pay. I would love to raise that. I would love to offer an amendment on SSA, but I can't do that because of the continued mismanagement of this whole issue in both houses. So I'm going to look at this for what it is. It's the AEA bill, and I'm not going to contribute to undermining the services needed by our special ed kids and all the other valuable services that SSAs provide. We can do better on school funding. We can do better on teacher salary. We have other opportunities to do just that. I'm not going to try to pursue those at the expense of undermining special education and the AEAs that have served us and served the students in this state so very well for half a century.
The chair recognizes the senator from Dubuque, Senator Yoakum.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Senators. My colleagues have laid out the potential legal and constitutional issues that are posed by putting 4 different subject matters in one bill title. My colleagues have laid out how we have shortchanged funding for public education for at least the last 8 years. And my colleagues have laid out how the decisions that were made 8 years ago on cutting collective bargaining have also had a direct impact on the problems we are facing today. Maybe 12 years ago, Iowa was ranked as one of the top 3 states in the nation for quality public education. Top 3. And because of that reputation, we were able to attract young families and teachers to move to Iowa. Not true anymore. Today we have over 1,000 openings just for teachers. I want to thank Senator McClintock for his comments and for listening to his constituents. Because I know everyone in this room has received literally hundreds of emails from their constituents begging us not to do this. Last week I had said that my heart hurts. Today I stand before you and tell you that my heart weeps for every Iowa child, and especially for every Iowa child with a disability. No one claimed that our current AEA system is perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect system because it's created by imperfect people, all of us. But what I do know is that you do not overhaul a system based on faulty analysis, faulty assumptions, and misleading information. And that's why the public and so many legislators said, don't do it this way. Put together a task force of all the stakeholders in this state to make recommendations on how to improve this system, not to dismantle it. I don't know how many of you know this. I know it's been mentioned that then Representatives Chuck Grassley and Del Stromer were instrumental in creating the area education system. What you might not know is that Del Stromer's daughter was Linda Upmeyer. And Linda Upmeyer followed in her father's footsteps and was also Speaker of the Iowa House. And of course, the AEA bill was signed into law by Republican Governor Bob Ray. Now, it was noted as being one of the best in the country, because Del Stromer and Chuck Grassley knew that there was no small school district that had the resources to be able to independently hire the specialized professionals that were needed to teach children, especially children with special needs. And so they created that AEA system so that no matter where that child lived, they would receive equitable and quality education services regardless of a zip code. So, senators, I want you to know that your vote today, make no mistake, you are dismantling the area education system. Make no mistake today that our job is to govern. Our job is to seek the right answer, not an answer based on faulty assumptions and analysis, not based only on one political party, because no one political party has all the answers, but to find the right answer. And that's not what we've done today. Every one of us will be held accountable and responsible for the decisions we make today, how it will impact the future of Iowa's public education system and the future of our children. Tomorrow's future is sitting in today's classroom. I can think of nothing more important for state government to do next to public safety than to make sure that our children are well educated and prepared for their future. Thank you, Madam President. Please vote no.
The chair recognizes the senator from Wapello, Senator Westrich.
Thank you, Madam President. So I rise in support of this bill. And contrary to what my colleagues have said over the past week or so, actually, and today, contrary to their comments that no one ran on this bill, that no one campaigned on this subject, well, I'd be remiss if I didn't stand and say I did campaign on this subject. And I did run on this topic. And door to door, I talked to folks back in 2018 when I made my first run for the House. And in my second attempt at the House, which I actually won that time, I also talked to folks about the AEA and visited with them because there's someone that's very close to me, very special to me, that brought it to my attention way back then, and even before 2018, that there should be more accountability, more transparency within the AEA. And those are my words and not hers, because her words cannot be used in this chamber. She was very passionate about this subject and very much wanted to help our children in Iowa and wanted reform within the AEAs. So a lot of the emails that I received addressed topics that were not within this bill, not even within the original bill that was brought by the Senate or the governor's bill or the House bill. A lot of the emails I received addressed things like child find and early access. And there were parents who were struggling and scared because of the misinformation that got put out there. And I met with several of those folks and met with some of them in person and addressed their emails, letting them know that's federal funding. So it was never in the bill, and it was never going to be in jeopardy. So I'm happy for this bill to come forward, and I will let my colleague, Senator Evans, do most of the talking. But I believe what we're doing here today is what I had hoped to accomplish and set out to do. I'm glad that with Senator Rosaboom and Senator Evans' efforts, they came up with something far greater than I could have, and I appreciate their efforts in addressing this and creating more transparency, more oversight. I think this is going to be great, and I'm in support of this bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam President. This bill is a hostile takeover of the AEAs. The false premise that it was based upon has the entire state now looking at dismantling the AEA system. If we want to really look at what's been failing our children, we need to look at the public education system as a whole. Why are we funneling millions of Iowa taxpayer dollars into private school vouchers? We see in this bill, which is basically trying to put a bow around a piece of garbage bill of the hostile takeover of the AEAs by putting a teacher increase and a 2.5 additional dollars for our schools in it. We could have so much more funding going into our public schools if you weren't using taxpayer dollars to fund private school vouchers. I look at what this bill does to the principals and superintendents by demanding that all professional development has to be approved by the Department of Education. And we all know that actually means all of the professional development will have to be approved by Governor Reynolds, because it appears that nothing can get out of her administration without her sign off on it. We've seen so many mean-spirited bills coming out of the governor's office. We've seen her say no to the summer food program. We've seen her cut unemployment benefits for children. We've seen her have our child care system put the highest work restrictions on new parents, more so than any other state in the country. We've seen her say yes to weaken child labor laws. We've seen her do nothing to protect our children from gun violence. We've seen what happens when she turns over systems to privatize. We've seen what's happened to the mental health institutes. We've seen what happens to girls when you shut down the girls' juvenile home. We've seen what's happened to privatize Medicaid, to our family planning system. We've seen now what our school budgets are going to look like with private school vouchers. We've seen how much she wants to invest in office furniture because of her government reorganization bill. When you dismantle the AEAs, you're taking away buying power from every school district in the state. You're taking away expertise for our children close to home. You're taking away a system that works and putting it in place of it one that's designed to fail with less resources. I want to thank the Republicans who have had the courage to stand up to our governor and not jump off the cliff with her from both chambers. You have a chance once again to do the right thing. Do not privatize our AEA system. We know our current system works. Don't believe the propaganda coming out of the governor's office. Please vote no.
Seeing no further senators seek the floor, the chair recognizes the senator from Cherokee, Senator Evans, for final comments on S5090 to H8220 to House File 2612.
Thank you, Madam President. So just to point out a few things here, what changes to this version of the bill as compared to what previously passed this chamber? So in year one, 100% of the special ed dollars will flow through the school district to the AEAs. In year two, 90% of the special ed support funding must continue to be paid to the AEA school board. Any special ed services requested must be provided by the AEA. So no special ed dollars are being taken out of the services for special education. Department of Ed oversight is being added. That was also a part of our bill. It's been in actually every version of the bill at some point in time. As I mentioned earlier, that was there in 1974 when the AEA system was first put into place. We're simply returning the oversight back to the department that was designed for compliance and oversight, which is the Department of Education, and taking it out of the hands of the AEA, which back when that was put into place in the late 90s to early 2000s, they did not want, they pushed back against having that oversight put on their actual in-the-field workers. They didn't want that responsibility. So now it puts it back in where it belongs. Additionally, something that was mentioned, this was actually in our bill as well, ed services and media services, 60% of the dollars, year one, will remain with the school district. 40% goes automatically to the AEAs to continue those services. In year two and years after, 100% will be under the control of the local school boards. But they can continue to do business with the AEA if they so choose. Those are local property tax dollars generated by local taxpayers. And they can use those funds for any local general fund purpose, which includes ed services and media services, provided by the AEA. AEA boards, there'll be a change in AEA boards. We're 4 superintendents on a 9-member board for overseeing AEAs. Now they will have more advisory capacity now than they've had. They will still be responsible for hiring and contracting personnel, but adding superintendents onto those boards gives direct access to the local school districts, have a direct input on AEA budgeting and the workings of the AEA. That's local control. So we've added in local control of funding of local property taxes for ed services, media services. We've added in some local control for special education services. And now we're adding in more local control by having direct input to the AEAs, by having superintendents selected by their AEA superintendents sitting on the AEA boards. Those are all good things. We asked for a report from AEAs to the local school districts on services that they are receiving and what the cost of those services are as being returned to the school district. That's something the school's never seen in the past. In this bill, those reports will be provided to the school district quarterly. So you'll see what services you're receiving every quarter, how much is going out each quarter, and what's being returned to the district in services by a monetary basis every quarter. So your school boards can review those and make decisions on how best to utilize the dollars that they have been provided for their children locally and the individual needs of those children. Teacher salaries have been a part of the governor's bill, has been a part of the Senate bill from the beginning. That is now back in the bill. Year 1, minimum teacher salary, $47,500. Year 2, minimum salary of $50,000. Year 1, those teachers with 12 years of experience or greater will receive no less than $60,000 for their salary. In year 2, $62,000. There will also be an additional $22 million put in for compaction into TSS, so school districts can address those potential compaction issues within their own salary schedule for veteran teachers that may not be addressed under the phased-in approach for teacher salaries. $14 million for paraeducators. These are people who work directly with our more challenging and most needy students on a daily basis. You talk about the legislative process and bouncing things back and forth and having discussions between chambers and people working on bills. You tell me this isn't a good addition. These are people who provide consistency for those children in their special education. The special education teacher doesn't follow that child around from class to class, as a few of us in this chamber know. Those paraeducators do. Those paraeducators work directly with those children, and they form a bond with those children and the children's families. These are important, critical people that work with our kids on a daily basis. This is a good addition. So when you look at this in its totality, SSA of 2.5, that's $121 million. Support staff, additional $14 million. Over $63 million just in year 1 going towards teacher salaries. And if you add in transportation equity, that'll increase by nearly $1 million, and a few other odds and ends that are in here. We're over 180 million in new spending for education just in this year. $180 million. That is a commitment. So we're not only addressing a support agency that since a 2011 study has been identified as probably needing some reform. Since 2018, Iowa has been a state in need of assistance for special ed services as identified by the federal government. So we're going to address that in this bill as well, because when they are on site in Des Moines this fall, they're going to expect some kind of a plan that shows we're making changes in the right direction. I can attest that this does that. But you can't expect the entire system to improve simply based on addressing the support service mechanism, the AEA, which is why it's important that we're raising teacher salaries and we're raising the salaries, providing additional money for salaries for those support staff personnel, paraeducators working with our children. Why is that important? Well, we use the model in business all the time. You offer a higher salary to someone because you want to recruit the best people possible to work in your organization. And if you have the best people possible working in your organization, you should see an improvement in that organization. So what this bill does is increases teacher salaries. And after it's fully phased in, Iowa will be in the top 5 in the U.S. for starting salaries. So the idea is that we're going to go back to attracting some of the best and brightest to go into teaching as a profession. We're going to increase that teacher candidate pool. Some of those are going to be special educators, or some of them will go on to get additional credits and credentials to become special educators. And we're going to be putting them into the classroom. And that's going to raise student achievement, not just in special education, but we're going to be raising student achievement across the board, because we're putting better, more highly qualified candidates into the system. We're going to be attracting some of our best and brightest kids coming out of high school to go back into, just like I did, like I wanted, to go into education and give back to their communities. This bill is in its entirety will not only improve student achievement in special education, it will not only help improve the AEA system, which is a support system for special ed and general education, but it's going to raise student achievement in its entirety in our state. You know, you talk about some schools that are having problems with the budget, and I've been in those situations as well in my career. And I think if you look at the school districts that are having the biggest problem with finances in their budget, I know just from my own past experience, generally it was due to declining enrollment. And a couple of the school districts that were mentioned here earlier, if you look at their enrollment, they've had declining enrollment, very large declining enrollment. That's not because of any funding mechanism that came out of this building. That's due to circumstances that would be outside of our control necessarily. In my case, it was because of a large business closing, but I think some school districts, people are choosing to vote with their feet because now we have open enrollment and we have private school choices that maybe didn't exist in the manner that they did before, and they're choosing a different or better option for their children. So I've heard my colleagues run down the process. I think this is how government is designed to work, to be honest with you, even though it's clunky, even though it's a little messy. Another thing I'd like to point out that was asked for from the beginning by the public, by the AEAs, by a number of people in this building was a task force. This bill has a task force in it, and it's very well prescribed, and it does invite pretty much all the stakeholders to the table. So it's going to have parents, it's going to have superintendents of large and small classes, it's going to have AEA representation, it's going to have special education teachers, it's going to have legislators who are non-voting. The legislators will be non-voting. And that's going to go on here very soon. Not too long after we adjourn, work will begin, maybe even sooner, on setting up that task force. So, though there will be input for additional changes to the system, and they'll be looking at things like what kind of services should the AEAs be providing? How should we be funding those services? They're going to have discussions on accredited non-publics and their role in this, because this is not just about public schools and public education. The AEAs serve all children. People forget that. This isn't a public education issue. This is an education issue. All children. When you're talking early childhood access funds, you're talking child find, those workers out in the field, they don't care if that child's going to end up in public school or if they're going to end up in private school. Their heart's in providing the proper services for those children and getting those services for those families and helping ensure those kids are kindergarten ready as best as we can. And those are dollars that were never in jeopardy, by the way, even though we get a lot of emails saying that those services are going to go away. Those are federal funds that flow directly from the Department of Ed to the AEAs. They don't flow through school district budgets. Okay, so there is some misinformation out there in what's going to be lost and what will not be lost. So, Madam President, with that, I move that, I'm asking for a yes vote on S5090, the amendment that's before us, and I move the amendment.
The senator from Cherokee, Senator Evans, moves that we concur in the House amendment and asks for a yes vote. Those in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion prevails. The Senate has concurred with the House. The senator from Cherokee, Senator Evans, moves that House File 2612, as amended, be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. The Secretary will read.
The body voted to amend the bill title. That amended bill title now reads as follows. House File 2612. Bill for Implementing Education, including modifying provisions related to duties and powers of area education agencies, membership of the boards of directors of the area education agencies, Department of Education, Department of Administrative Services, area education funding. This calculates teacher salary, supplemental district cost per pupil, and minimum teacher starting salary, including transition effective date and applicable provisions being enacted by the General Assembly State of Iowa.
The senator from Cherokee moves that the reading thus far be considered the last reading of the bill. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion prevails. Is the title agreed to? The title is agreed to. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of the passage of House File 2612 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote nay. The Secretary will open the voting system and receive your vote. Senator Sweeney votes aye. Senator Edler votes aye. Senator Webster votes aye. Senator Knox votes nay. The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Whitver.
Thank you, Madam President. Please excuse Senator Salmon until she arrives.
Senator Salmon will be excused until she arrives. The chair recognizes the senator from Dubuque, Senator Yoakum.
Madam President, please excuse Senator Walls until he arrives.
Senator Walls will be excused until he arrives. Has every senator voted? Every senator has voted. The secretary will close the voting system. The secretary will lock the voting system and record your vote. The Senate will pay attention to the results of the roll call, those voting aye 30, those voting nay 18. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, is declared to have passed the Senate, and the title was agreed to. The chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Whitver.
Thank you, Madam President. This time, I ask unanimous consent to immediately message House File 2612.
The senator from Polk, Senator Whitver, asks unanimous consent to immediately message House File 2612. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Senator Whitver, you are in order.
Republicans will caucus in room 22.
The Senate will be